Welcome to the third panel of the day. This is the role of AI in education. It's the third panel of our second day in the Generative AI and the Knowledge Economy Symposium here, hosted by both DSIs at the LSE and Imperial. I'm John Cardoso-Silva, and I'm here with my fabulous guests. They're amazing people. Everyone here is working on AI chatbots, AI, or thinking about generative AI, and how that is impacting education, both in the context of being educators and in the context of the wider context of the sector. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next 45 minutes. I myself also do some research on generative AI in education. I lead the Genio project, but I'll be playing the role of moderator here. But if you want to know more about what we're doing at the DSI, you can go to our website, Data Science Institute. You'll find some information there about the Genio project, for example. Let me introduce our panelists, my colleagues here, before we start firing questions. And of course, there will be a moment for a Q&A right at the end. So on my left here, I have Mairéad Pratschke. Mairéad is a professor and chair in digital education at the School of Arts, Languages and Cultures at the University of Manchester. Mairéad has just finished writing a book on generative AI in education. I know that's not the title. But,
actually, it almost is.
It almost is the title. So she's been thinking about that very profoundly lately. Next I have Dr. Steve Watson, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge, who also happens to have written a book on the topic. I have not written a book on the topic. Can you share the title of your book?
Emergent Discourses in Generative AI in Education.
Emergent Discourses.
And hopefully it'll be out later in the year. Short monograph. We
should have them both later on to do their book lunches here with us, perhaps. Last but not least, we have Sue Attewell, who is the head of AI and co-design at JISC, a not-for-profit organization that specializes on tertiary education, research, and innovation, and provides services to many institutions around the UK. Sue works actively in supporting members of the community, of the organization, on how to use AI, generative AI, responsibly for education. So I feel that we have very special set of guests here. So to get started, I want to pose a personal question to my colleague panelists. I want them to start by sharing pick one way in which generative AI is changing or is making an impact in your professional life as educators, thinkers, and as it relates to education. Mairéad, perhaps.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, I will say that about 3 months after I took up the position that I'm in now at the University of Manchester, that was when ChatGPT 3.5 was launched in the end of November. So I had been in my job for about 3 months at that point, and it hit like a hurricane, as I'm sure you all know, and it was really kind of watching what was happening around me at that university and many other very much campus-based universities in the UK made me realise that there were some gaps that needed to be filled, probably in terms of digital and post-digital education and awareness. So that's really what I've been focused on, I suppose, is jumping into that role and figuring out how to help my colleagues at Manchester and also other institutions make sense of generative AI. I've spent about the last year and a half talking about it, and I've been very lucky to be invited to speak internationally all over the place. So I've had a lot of help with my research as well, in that I've gotten feedback from educators everywhere from Singapore to South Africa to Spain to North America, which has really informed my views on what we need to do in education.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I think it's, I picked this up. I describe myself as transdisciplinary studies, so that means I'm interested in just about anything. So I have a background in engineering as well as sociology and education. And when ChatGPT dropped in November, I couldn't help myself. I kind of immersed myself in this technology, and within weeks I was saying, well, how can I use this in my work? What can I do with this in both research and teaching and learning? And I think the kind of behaviours I have with these things is to, when I get a new toy like that, is to test it to its limits and really try and understand it, and really understand how it fits in with me and what I do. And I think what's been transformative is working with, I work mostly with postgraduate students, is working with them, and often they're using it in quite creative ways as well, and some have spent quite a lot of time. I think a lot more students in Cambridge, estimate 60-70% at least of the students are using it effectively but anxious about talking about it because of regulation, so much more than faculty members. So I'm caught in this internal dialogue about how it should be used, and a lot of the time is people understanding what its capabilities are, beyond being a kind of clever, sometimes slightly flawed search engine, but this real capability around meaning and understanding, you know, its possibilities in terms of meaning. So I write a lot of theoretical stuff, so I'll give you my favourite prompt. Expand, explain and exemplify, and then I'll insert one of my paragraphs, and I found that a really, really useful prompt. That and summarise the following.
Thank you. Sue?
I think I do a bit of what you both already mentioned. We focus around supporting our members, so we do a lot of practical advice, guidance and training. And I travelled around a lot on trains and planes talking about generative AI. But I think I was just going to focus on a couple of aspects of my job which I think are the most helpful for me personally. One is personal use. You know, everything I write, I throw it in and say, how can I improve this? Don't rewrite it for me. Tell me how I can improve it. And that's because, you know, I was taught to write passively. I spent a while in the civil service, and they drum any kind of character out of your writing. So my writing actually is a kind of 180-degree turn to how I talk. And using ChatGPT is slowly been, because that's my preferred tool for this kind of thing, it's slowly been teaching me and improving my writing and making it more engaging because I'm learning from it. So it's a really good teaching tool to teach you how to use things. And the other element that I'm really enjoying is that I've recently concluded a piece of student research, which is discussion forums with students about their hopes, concerns, needs around generative AI, and I'm just about to start doing a similar piece of work with staff. And having those discussion forums with people around generative AI, I love doing those, but they're really insightful as well.
Thank you. So let me pick on some of the topics that you all mentioned about. So I sense a theme of using AI to be productive or to extract something more out of something you've written or you're reading. So Sue, you specifically said that you're learning from that. So you for your own writing. Is that because you are intentional about, okay, I'm using that and I'm asking you to rewrite, and then I'm reading, and then I'm learning how to actually reframe how I want to sound? Or do you think it's the actual tool that does that to you? Like anyone who would use it for rewriting stuff would be also in a position as a learner?
I find it really good to learn things I haven't done or relearn things that I haven't done for ages. You know, I think if you're clear, that's why I always say when I'm asking it to do my writing, I say, do not rewrite it for me, because it will rewrite it for me and I can just take that. I don't want it to do that because I don't want to sound like everybody else who's using AI. I still want to sound like me, but a better me, and that's what I think is helping. But one of my team did a blog for us the other week because she had to do a task around our engagement metrics. We were doing some reporting, and she never really used Excel before, and she taught herself how to use Excel to do the task using ChatGPT, and then wrote a blog about how useful and how it had taught her to do that, which I think, you know, just shows how useful it is for that kind of thing. Just kind of coaches you through it, which is that's a kind of good style for me and how I learn.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Mairéad, Stephen?
Yeah, I think this idea, I'm thinking what Sue said, and I often think that when I'm writing stuff or when I'm getting my students to write stuff is the real luxury is to have lots of people to share that bit of writing with, to kind of, first of all, get a sense of how other people make sense of that. in order for that to be published or go further, but to get a sense of what the possible meanings of that text be. But in a kind of pretty intense work environment in higher education, I'd be lucky to expect colleagues to go more than, oh, it sounds all right to me, but having generative AI, a large language model, to concentrate on, we're mostly text still, I've got a kind of electric reviewer. I can say, well, give me 5 different interpretations of this, or how could this be understood in different ways? So that's been really valuable in helping me write, and that's the kind of way in which I've been sharing with students about how to understand it. Think about what they're saying. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say something slightly different in that all of those are obviously really valuable and legitimate uses of the tools, and those are the ones that we're talking about a lot, right? Summarization, someone to kind of bounce your ideas off. I made a point of not using AI when I was writing my book because I was completely paranoid that somebody would spot something and say that was AI written. I didn't even check it with Grammarly, because we know what happens when you use Grammarly. You get flagged because it's AI. What I have been doing instead is I've been really paying attention to how it's changing practice, because I think that this is actually what's missing from the conversation in academia. There's been so much focus on how we can use it for writing, which is legitimate and helpful, as a tutor, as a buddy, as a feedback mechanism. But for me, the significance of the change has been misunderstood. And we've been looking at student writing, and we've been all worried about things like plagiarism. And we've been worried that students are going to use GPT or Claude or Gemini or any of the multitude of LLMs to generate text. For me, actually, that misses the point. And the point is that what's happening is practice is changing. Writing as a practice is changing. And I think that that's the bit that's the most important, because that's just one practice that's changing with AI. And if you look at your own discipline, you think about it, and you think about what your practice is now, how is AI changing it? That's actually the significance here. So whether you're a medical practitioner, whether you're in engineering, whether you're studying art history, whether you're studying music, whether you're studying anything, it's actually the interaction with AI that's important, because that is what's informing the really big change, the shift in practice. So I think we need to change the discussion in education, because we've been so focused on the generated text, the alarm bells about cheating, the plagiarism, that we've actually missed the significance, which is that AI is changing our practice because we are now collaborating with AI in our disciplines. And we've been listening to all of these panels for the last couple of days about how those practices and those applications are changing with AI. So for me, that's the key that's the message that I try to talk about, and I test it myself as well. And I use AI myself, honestly, more as a feedback tool, sounding board, very much in the style of what we hear about in the medical field, where you need someone to just talk to and get some feedback on your ideas. So I use it in the sense of a presence.
Speaking out loud.
And really as the presence rather than as a tool, because I also think that's the true significance of generative AI. It's his role as a presence in your life. It's not so much as a tool. It's more something different. Yeah.
Let's talk about practice, because continue on that topic, because this has everything to do with the knowledge economy and everything that we're talking about here these 2 days, in the sense that let me go first on a very specific topic, that when ChatGPT came out, everyone was panicking about the essay is dead. We saw all of that. Coding assignments are dead because now the AI can generate code for you. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel it's not exactly like that. And perhaps because, as you're saying, like the practices are changing, and that means that perhaps we need to adapt to those, and because maybe the practices we had before were not suitable. Also, like the way we tested students, assessed students, did not work. So, talking about practice and relating that to assessments, how do you view moving forward? Academia should think about education in general, not just academia. Should think about assessments, for example, because it's a practice-based measurement, right? We're measuring performance.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work with this, and in conjunction with our community, so we've got some quite active collaborative working groups focusing on this, and one of the things we've done is produce a range of tools around how to change your assessment. But I think, essays, they focus in on recall. As I've said on a few of these things, I've had many, many interviews in my life, and at none of them have I ever been asked about recall, ever. And if they did, I'd probably just turn around and walk out because I wouldn't be able to answer it. You know, it's not a competence employers are bothered about. It's that thing of, a good example is that if anybody asks you to do something different in your role, one of the first things most people will say is to their colleagues, have you done one of these before? Can I see it? Can you point me in there? And if they haven't, then you'll Google it and say, who's done one of these? Let me have a look at the template. You know, give me some examples. That's how we work. You know, that's what generative AI is doing. It's changing how we work. And education has to change to reflect that. What we should be assessing, you know, this is not about, and it's not about generative AI changing assessment. These are discussions that have been going on for as long as I can remember about how assessment needs to change. You know, this is about assessment as part of the learning process. It's still pedagogically driven, you know. People should be thinking about, what should the student have learned? How best should I assess that they have learnt what they are supposed to have learnt? Not, I'll just set an essay.
Stephen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think this tension, I think that's exactly right. As a school teacher, which I was at one time, and also now in higher education, this sense of continuity in practice is really important, and it may be expressed through a number of colleagues in my university who might just want this thing unplugged forever, because it appears to them as damaging to education. But it's there's just more an expression of something quite systemic about education, in the nature of the continuity of practice. And as a teacher, I wanted to teach in problem-solving, inquiry-based ways, but on a Friday afternoon with a bottom-set grade 9 class, it would just be some chalk and talk and practice. So there's this security that we have in practice. And I think one of the things that we're slowly putting forward to it in Cambridge is the opportunity for groups of students and academics to work together in a more sandbox style of way to explore this technology. Because I think there's quite a steep learning curve in getting used to and getting a feel for it and getting a feel about how it might be used and understanding where it might be used and what for. I've found people advocating for things that it's not really capable of doing. So I think how we handle that, this complexity of change of practice is really important, rather than a decision maker saying, we'll do it like this, because we don't know whether that's going to really work or really going to stick with the complexity of practices and the variations of those in higher education. So a bit of socio-technical experimentation, as one of my PhD students calls it.
That connects well with what Sue was talking about in terms of, like, that's how we function in the real world. Like, we work like that, we assess information, we collaborate like that. So there should be perhaps more ways of integrating that. Perhaps we can talk about how institutions can support their teaching stuff. But before we go there, I just want to play devil's advocate for a little while, because someone here made a point earlier on the health panel that I found really interesting, because it relates to what you were saying, Sue, on the topic of recall. I also tend to agree with you that recall, like, when do I ever need to remember that information? But someone was saying that, imagine someone was trained, a medical doctor was trained to use AI tools. That's how, in the future, that's how people are trained to trust whatever the AI spits out. Even though they learned the theory, learned something else, but the AI would tell the diagnosis, the prognosis, and all of that. But then, and I think if you are you can probably refresh my mind, but the point was that, okay, so what about the recall of the medical doctor? So does this person remember, actually understand what's going on, understands why the AI is giving that suggestion, giving that recommendation? So that has some implications for education, right? So if we learn how to use these tools, and in a way that we rely on them so much for, like, we delegate the thinking to them, it might cause problems in the long run. Do you see it that way, or do you disagree with that? Maybe Mairéad.
I love a yes/no question.
Yes or no?
I disagree.
You can only have a yes or no.
Okay, clearly first I disagree, and now I will elaborate on why. So first of all, the research does show that if we start to rely on AI as the expert, we do tend to get lazy. We already have research that shows that. So we have to be aware of that, we have to be attentive to that, and you know, be aware that we need that human expertise, the so-called human in the loop, not just in the programming and the LLM and the technical sense, but actually in the practitioner sense as well. You need to have that human in the loop, given the human expertise. You know, as you were talking about practice, and you were talking really about, I mean, maybe I suppose really competencies, we've talked a little bit about learning as process. Something that popped into my head was that, you know, there are all kinds of discussions going on at the international level about these topics, but we're calling them something different. So, for example, the UNESCO is talking about reframing competencies and redefining competencies, and there's a lot of discussion about whether there's human competencies, AI competencies, or whether there are now human plus AI competencies. So I think there is recognition. OECD is also working on something where they're looking at measuring human plus AI competencies, and how you can, in their precept program, how you can now determine whether or not students are learning, actually making sense, learning as process, doing all of this practice-based learning, but are they learning what they need to learn with the AI? And that is something different, because until now we've been looking at it very much as a binary, but what is starting to happen is people are recognizing that we are working, as I said, with AI. We are collaborating with AI to create new knowledge, new understanding, and that is actually going to be how we have to determine whether or not students have learned something. Because the reality of the future workplace, not even the future, the present workplace, my dentist records all of our calls using otter.ai. He doesn't have to transcribe anything. It's all recorded for him. He knows everything. I get a letter within 30 seconds telling me what he's going to do. You know, so these things are already in the workplace. Practitioners are already using them. So what we actually need to be focusing, I think, is, yes, practice learning as process. And I could go on about that, but I know we have limited time, but I have ideas for how we can scale learning as process. I think a lot of the reluctance to embrace this is about the system we work in. It's the fact that people worry about scale, that we don't have the resources, that we're a system under stress, especially in the UK right now. We all know that. But really what's happening is we're starting to move towards a model, I believe, and we're seeing it, as I said, at the OECD level, at the UNESCO level, and now gradually at the various nation-state levels, where we are starting to look at how are we going to measure human plus AI competence. For me, this is the future. This is what we need to focus on. We don't need to focus on just what does the human know, what does the AI know, because that's not how the world is working. We need to focus on how we're going to create education that measures those together in collaboration.
That's
Do you want to go first?
I'm going to come at this from the student point of view, coming out of the student forums. Students are, you know, very much, we did these around, first time I did these was around 12 months ago, and restarted them, did them over last winter. And in that short period of 9 months, the student use, we've really seen mature. You know, they're using AI in a much more sophisticated way. They're using it as a digital coach. They're using it in the way we would want them to use to help them and support their learning. And they're very aware of things like intellectual development and the risk of relying on this too much. But they're also expecting their institutions to make sure that balance is maintained. So, you know, for me, I'll push that back as that is the challenge from the student point of view. Embed AI across education, but ensure that they still get the relevant intellectual development.
I think one of the things to think about in terms of knowledge and learning is that the history of human society, we have always been involved with some kind of technology in the creation of knowledge. And I was just joking with Sue about, you know, Socrates being not well enamoured with the invention of writing. He thought this was an existential threat to education, in the fact that it would undermine students' capacity to learn. And I think there were similar kind of arguments around the development of printing. And what's difficult to predict from one side of a technological innovation that gets adopted at scale, like writing, like printing, like generative AI, is the emergence of practice. What happens with the human and that technology? What does it mean? What practices emerge and what possibilities emerge? And the challenge here is for regulation and guidance, and say, what can we do here? It's too complicated to predict, but the it's necessary for regulators to say, do this or don't do this. And so it's a very fast-moving field in terms of trying to regulate this but also support it.
I think that's the real challenge for institutions, how they can start to move away from this long-term. Somebody once said to me the other week, we're just working on our 10-year plan for generative AI, and I'm like, why?
We're going to 10 days.
And I think the real challenge for institutions is to start thinking how they can adapt more agilely, and how they can become more iterative and adaptive and responsive.
Let's get through to the end of the weekend.
That's right. That's right.
But this is the critical issue. I mean, this is the canary in the coal mine that you talk about it at an institution or with institutional leaders, and like I said, the plagiarism issue comes up a lot. What doesn't come up a lot is we don't have the funding and the resources to retrain our staff to use all of these tools. We don't have the time to set aside to help our teachers learn how to use these tools and integrate these tools. Because what nobody is really saying is that when UNESCO's new competencies roll down and when every other country starts to implement them, what that actually means in terms of design of learning is that you have to go back to those competencies, because the competencies are the basis of every learning design that you create. So you can't just look at your assignment and say, I'm going to tweak it a bit and add Gen AI. What you actually have to do is go back to your course learning outcomes. You have to rewrite them for those human and AI competencies, and from that, everything cascades down. So you have your outcomes will change. That means your assessments will change, because they have to map to those outcomes. And that means the learning activities that you design for your students have to also address those outcomes that they will then be proving in their assessment. It's a huge picture, it's a holistic picture, and I think sometimes we break it into these little parts and we fail to see that it's a bigger picture, and it's actually a systemic issue that we need to be addressing. And we need to really be looking at how are we going to implement, as you said, Sue, learning as process. Steve, how are we going to look at practice? How is it changing? How are we going to fund it? If we have all these fabulous efficiency gains thanks to these Gen AI tools that are going to make us all super duper efficient, great. But what's the other side? It's effectiveness. There's efficiency and there's effectiveness. As educators, we need to be thinking about teaching effectiveness. That means measuring learning. That's what we need to be focusing on, I think, more than this efficiency gain that everyone is going on about. That's not our core, what's the right word? That's not our core product. Our product is education, knowledge, and knowledge is changing.
Let me go there.
The efficiency, hopefully, will free up a little bit of time.
100%.
To do the things that are important in the job, because a lot of the stuff we have to do, let's be honest, it's not that important.
Can I say one thing about that? That's a narrative we hear, and I agree with you, but it's one thing that I find that I get a tiny bit troubled from when I see it in the landscape of EdTech Gen AI tools. You can't go online and Google a Gen AI for teaching platform without seeing the word time pop up and how it's going to save you time, a million times over. And yes, it is super important that we can all manage to be more efficient and save ourselves time so we can devote more time to what really matters, as they also usually say as their secondary tagline. But I think we also need to be cognizant of what we are skipping out on if we become too reliant on those tools. So just like we started with, will it make us lazy if we use those tools? Yes, if we trust them completely. Do we want to farm out our learning design to classroom generators? No, we don't, because what are we doing if we're actually doing that? Down the line, fast forward, you're actually automating yourself out of a job. Why would you do that?
And also, that is the stuff we want to make it more human, right?
Exactly.
So that's the stuff we want to make it, like, embrace more conversation, embrace more stuff.
Exactly.
That is the
what we
value of the
automate is really important.
Yeah.
We have to make the decisions about what we automate, not let the technology make the decisions.
So we went there on the topic of institutions. So we're talking about like the systemic pressures, like there's workload, there's problems with time management and all of that. So there's things about how the students, we're hearing from students that they want their institutions to adapt and incorporate that and have the human plus AI competencies in there. But now let me ask you a provocative question. So what is really the role of an institution? So is it just credentialing? Because if you have, I'm speaking here at LSE. No, but I don't mean that, and that's not correct. So really, the point is, so if let's assume the case where universities push back and say, no, we're doing the teaching because we care about the knowledge, or we care about applying these tools and techniques, and we're not going to jump on every single hype of technology out there. So if institutions decided to do that, they probably, from what I'm getting from you all, is that we're going to be left behind and we're going to be irrelevant in a way. So then what really is the point of institutions of higher education or otherwise?
I think the institutions remain very important because in modern society they're the key point at which we can organise decision making. So it's how we make decisions about how we use these tools. So that continues to be important, whether and increasingly with generative AI and insisting in making those decisions. But I think one of the other points I just want to make about this is all technological solutions that come along to solve problems, and generative AI, as I see it sociologically, solves a particular problem in a hyper-individualised network society where there's increasing problems of communication. You don't have to go on X to see people arguing over the most minor things to see that there's problems of communication. So it solves problems of communication in that sense, but all technological innovations in solving problems also create lots of new ones as well, and we've got to keep a handle on that as well. And the organisation or an institution is going to be absolutely valuable in that process, and how those change. But central to that is decision making about education. The viability of that education, the viability of knowledge making. So all of these institutions are going to be really, really important in this. But they evolve and change. As different to the monasteries and scriptoria of the Middle Ages to, that was my university, to a modern 21st university. In fact, when I started there...
Steve, if only there was that much difference between those two models you've just mentioned.
There was quite a lot. I mean, when I first joined that, they inducted me and said, this is an institution with the constitution of a medieval monastery, but as a 21st century global organisation. And so, kind of handling these contradictions is what organisations do and what people do together. Oh, shut up.
Wow, no, so much to jump on. Could you mind if I say something?
Any final notes on the added value of universities and institutions?
Added value,
or
value
should we even care about
Listen, it's such business terminology too, isn't it? Like, I always think about, what's the value add for education? What's the value add for instructors now that we can all have personalised tutors, for example? You just opened the can of worms with that. I mean, that's the obvious one as well, isn't it? If anyone watched the demos last week, you saw, Sal Khan with his son doing a very awkward-looking demo of Can Migo. I wonder how much you paid him to do that. But anyway, we all know that that's there. And I think back to your institutional question, your kind of cheeky question about credentials. I'll just say quickly, that's a really important question. There was an article in Inside Higher Ed about 2-3 weeks ago from 2 profs in the US who said the issue that we're not seeing addressed is that, again, back to competencies, universities, if they are just credential, creating institutions, which, yes, I really hope we are more than that, but if that's all they are, then where's the discussion about the competencies and the professional accreditation bodies that are gauging whether or not our graduates are ready for those to work in those industries, for example? Again, back to the whole, it all filters down. It doesn't just filter down from what we do at the institution level. It actually has to map to what is expected outside of the institution as well. We are part of society, right? We are creating knowledge that exists in a society that is changing so rapidly. And I think, of course, I'm sure we all know that the further we fall behind, the more problematic that is. Yet, on the other hand, we don't want to get just caught up in every wave and every, I had someone at an institution about a year or so ago say to me they were just going to wait out this Gen AI wave and see what came of it. And I thought, well, good luck with that. See you later. But, there is a bit of edtech fatigue. There is a bit of, it's another thing we have to learn. There's a COVID fatigue. And I think sometimes there has, in some of the people I've talked to, various different institutions, not necessarily even just in the UK, there's that kind of hangover from COVID where rather than taking the learning and the experience and the digital upskilling we got from COVID, a lot of institutions kind of, thank God that's done. Back to campus. More Zoom calls. Yeah. And instead of capitalising on that upskilling that we managed to have, we've kind of missed that opportunity. So now we have to jump back on again, unfortunately. Sorry.
So any final thoughts on the role of institutions?
Yes, I think I kind of agree and disagree with both of you, because I think ideally you would want the institutions to be leading change, showing society where it's going, whereas I feel they're very far behind. And I do feel that that big challenge is about how to make institutions more agile and more adaptive. It's bigger than generative AI. But I think just picking up on that about institutions leading, I think it's also about making sure that they're focused on what students need. And the amount of times when I was doing the student discussion forums that students were quite blunt about, we're paying for our education, we're expecting it to prepare us for a job that we're going into in the future, and it's not.
Yeah.
We're being let down.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that's a very short-term issue, but I fear it's not.
As part of that structural problems that we were discussing, perhaps.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the existential, that's the existential threat right there. If students start to think that their institutions are not serving them,
They're already thinking it.
I agree, they are.
Students in the room, don't drop your degrees.
Please don't leave.
They're not, but there are other ways.
Yeah.
There are other providers waiting in the wings, and I don't say that's the right route. That's not where I'm coming from. I do think universities should be there and they should be leading, but they need to move faster.
Yep, and lead the changes.
Yes, lead the change.
That's a very interesting perspective. So we're going to open up for Q&A from the room. So if you have a question, raise your hand. So I have first hand here in the middle, in blue, grayish.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So wait until the mic is there. Yep. So let's get one question and then I move around. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Fascinating conversation.
Very short, yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I'll keep it super short then and say that was great talking about everything that we can think through today. But looking out, say 5 years, maybe 10, what does good look like for education? And institutions part or not necessarily the centre of it, I don't mean to provoke in any way, but I'm saying what does good look like for education in society, and perhaps what does bad look like as well?
Wow, okay.
I could start. So I've been doing a lot of looking at other institutions, and I've been looking at what ASU has done. That's Arizona State University. They're miles ahead. We know that. They've been doing digital for years and years and years. But there was an interview with their CIO at an event a week or two ago, and he really kind of made it clear that what you need is to embed a culture of innovation so that your educators can learn the tools, can learn how to do all the things that they need to do, so that they can continue on this journey of digital transformation. So my answer really is it depends on where they start. So some institutions are much more digitally ahead than others, to put it politely. His is very far ahead, others not so far ahead. So where does it look in 5 years? Depends on where you start. But no matter where you are starting from, you have to go through certain, I think, baby steps of embedding that digital competence, those digital skills. Now it's AI skills, post-digital skills, but it's really about giving your professors, your lecturers, and your students, obviously, the space and the time to experiment, but also to learn how to design learning for digital environments. That is a huge gap that I see missing in a lot of UK institutions. So 5 years from now, I would love to see every university in the UK having a digital first approach, which is obviously now an AI first approach, that pays attention to competencies, that designs to actually measure learning that will achieve those competencies, that answers what we need outside of the institution in industry, but also is very true to what the university offers, which is that knowledge and knowledge creation, and that is firmly grounded in the expertise of the staff that work at that institution.
So more proactive and less reactive in a way.
Oh God, yeah.
So I had a question from, so the second person was the lady there, yeah? Thank you.
Hi, thanks. My question is about, in the beginning you talked about using AI as a learning tool, but we touched upon college students and doing bachelor's or master's degree. But I want to touch base for primary schools, education in primary schools, because those were the ones who suffered quite a lot in COVID times with digital learning. I want to know, what do you think, what could be potential use cases for AI in primary schools? And at this point I want to emphasize on developing nations rather than developed nations, where the use of technology, and the technology is not readily available for primary school kids.
So it's a question on primary school, so earlier childhood learning and equity as well. So
yeah, I can have a crack at this one because I've just been working on a project related to this, and the first big challenge is the availability of generative AI for under 13. So that's the first challenge, and making available types of generative AI that can be used. But it's the potential for inclusion is really quite enormous in that. So I'd like to see kinds of generative AI models that are available, but the challenge is understanding what they are, but also for teachers understanding what kind of pedagogy they're going to use with that. And again, I think it's, you've said baby steps, really. I think it's about working with teachers and different experts to try and find ways.
Can I just come in very quickly on this, just because I was at an event on Friday in Scotland, and actually they've done quite a lot of work with primary schools, and they a couple of weeks ago had an AI week across primary schools in Scotland. So there's a lot of learning to be done there on their site. But one of the things I think is important to pick up on from that age is something that traditionally it's information literacy. It's having that understanding of sources, how to decide what information you trust or don't trust, misinformation. In the Netherlands and in the Scandies, they teach information literacy at primary school. We traditionally leave it to about 17. A lot of the battle's been lost at that stage, and people have decided they'd rather trust these random sources. So I think it's something, as a nation, we should teach much, much earlier. It's going to be so important going forwards, the ability to decide whether information is robust and correct and should be trusted or not.
So it's a question of curriculum planning and at all levels.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get, there was this question here, and then another one on the back, and then I come to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. We know that OECD's PISA is going to introduce learning in the digital world in 2025. Assessment module is going to be a new part of their assessment. Is that what you meant when you talked about them, UNESCO and OECD, developing AI human
No,
assessment?
I was talking specifically about the PRISA program. PRISA, God, I got the acronym wrong. PRISA.
And could you clarify what
Yeah. So it's a program, basically it's for kids, and I have to say normally I don't deal very much with primary age, but that's a really interesting question. But so this is teenagers, roughly 15 to 18-year-olds, and the name of the assessment escapes me. I want to say PRISMA, sorry if I got it wrong, but if you Google OECD 2025, basically they released a report 2023 that showed that they needed to investigate this idea of human and AI competencies together. So this is a test that measures international students' abilities on things like mathematics, English, kind of basic writing, so it's not specialized university level, it's more secondary level. So they are piloting a new program where, as I said, they are now piloting the idea of having students, as they're doing their assessments, they're going to be using AI to do it. So they're checking to see how the AI actually helps students. So for example, all the ways that university lecturers have been worried about students cheating, they're having them do that. So they're having them use, let's say, Claude or Gemini or whatever tool they want, and they're able to open it up and they're able to use that to get the recall knowledge, because they don't want them to focus on those lower level kind of recall skills. They want them to go straight to the kind of higher order, critical thinking, analysis, etc., that we always hear about. And they want to see, they're doing the research to see how it works and see whether or not they can discover whether or not there's this category of human and AI competencies together, and how they might describe them. The UNESCO work is slightly different. UNESCO is still, to my mind, quite focused on separating them. And they've been doing a lot of sharing the frameworks for teachers as well as for higher ed educators online. Feng-Chung Mao, who's the kind of leader for UNESCO, he's very active on LinkedIn, and he shares his draft frameworks all the time. You can go and follow him, and you can say what you think, and you can suggest something new. But basically, they have a massive big AI and human competencies framework. They're splitting it into pedagogy, skills, awareness, development. Very, very complex framework, and they're still creating it, but they have a separate one for kind of K-12, primary, secondary to higher ed. But the OECD one that I'm referring to is starting in 2025. Yeah, and if you want, I can chat to you afterwards and give you an actual link, because my brain doesn't have the name of it, but it's on my phone.
Let's get 2 questions now. So there's one there, and there's, yeah, you here. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is about an example. We have calculator and non-calculator math papers. Yeah. So what has happened is my son is in year 9. He gets assignments now. When he was in year 6 and year 5, he used to take a lot of time to finish it. Now what he does is he opens up the ChatGPT, he types it, he does it, and he paraphrases it, and he comes and shows it to me. I am not able to find out, where he got it from. So he does it in about 10 minutes. And I asked him, is it allowed? He said, nobody said it's not allowed. So I kind of feel teachers are going a bit more easy on ChatGPT than calculators. So even in the parents' evening and all, they don't talk about ChatGPT. They talk about mobile phones, don't bring it. They're very strict on that. So what I feel is, if you have like statistics, probability and all, you can do everything by calculator, but the universities have stopped it, okay? You don't bring it, you do it. And you need to know differentiation, integration, everything. So ChatGPT kind of, I feel, maybe in 10, 20 years are going to make human beings like zombies, They won't know anything. So
let's hang that. So the calculator and GPT. Let me just get the final question, and then we discuss both. Can you, someone bring the mic on this side? Yeah. Edmund here has been waiting patiently.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Very interesting discussion. It's related to that gentleman's question as well.
Okay,
it's basically assessment. Has assessment protocols changed during the time that we've had ChatGPT? And also, I guess at another level, how do you really determine that the student has understood the concepts, right? And how do you differentiate which student is better than the other? How do you grade them? Do they get A, B, C, or first or 2, 1 or 2, 2?
Right.
Has that changed?
Great. So we have 2 questions that are very interlinked as well. So like the analogy of calculator and ChatGPT, and another one about what really are we measuring if we are to measure something with assessments, right? Sue, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to come in on the first question. We recently did a survey, our leadership survey we do every year, has really good engagement across universities and colleges. And less than half of colleges and universities, I can't quite remember which way round it was, one was 38% and the other was 46%, so pretty low, have provided guidance for staff and all students. It's not even half. And then increasingly, they're talking about academic integrity and students cheating. I'm like, how can you say a student cheated if you've not told them what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do? And I'm like, that's not good enough, It's and even those that have provided guidance, the student feedback is often, it's ambiguous. I don't understand what I'm allowed to do and what I'm not allowed to do. I didn't actually know we had guidance. So there's the role of the institution, yes, they're there to teach, but if they're going to have guidance, they need to have clear, unambiguous guidance and make sure that students and staff are aware of it and can follow it. They don't at the moment, but they need to. So, yes, please do think about it. We have lots of guidance about how to write it.
Yeah. It's a huge gap, like it should be addressed, definitely.
Should be there.
Yeah. Anyone wants to comment on the assessment so we can close?
Yes. I think just in response to your comment, I was with a workshop over a week in Beijing Normal University in Zhuhai last June. And everyone had a VPN and was using ChatGPT, even though it's banned there. It seems like the government just turns a blind eye to, they know people need to know about this. But a very experienced teacher she responded to somebody who was a trainee teacher who said, what do you do if a student just turns in an essay written by generative AI? And she said, that's a teaching opportunity to explore the idea. And similarly, it's very good at formative assessment. it's a very useful tool for formative assessment. I think I can give students a lot better feedback, whether it's maths or sociology, with that. What it can't do is grade. You know, so we're still reliant on kind of criterion reference, norm reference, and then the usual kind of, you know, grading bands from that. So it supports assessment. But assessment people are just very anxious about it, at the moment.
30 seconds?
30 seconds.
So, you know, again, this is another huge one, right, where it is very much about the system and it is very much about learning for the exam, which we know is an issue, again, in UK institutions and probably institutions all over the world, where students are also quite transactional. I'm sure those of you who teach have noticed that. They want to know how to get an A. They want to know how to pass, right? They are very aware of the fact that they need to get a certain grade, to get a certain job, to get a certain degree, etc. I honestly think, if I were to just super quick answer, it has to come down to learning as process. We have to shift to learning as process. We have to remove ourselves from this addiction to the essay and the final exam and the final everything, and we have to use the technology that we now have at our disposal to shift in that direction. And we actually can. There is lots of research being done on how you can use AI to measure learning as process as well. So I think if we start to invest more in that future, and start to look at that, instead of looking back at what we've lost, which is showing you can recall information, that's actually where we need to be heading. How's that for short?
That was great.
Perfect,
yeah.
thank you.
So just a final point on this is that here at LSE, just to say something that I know about what we were doing here, at the LSE we have working groups that are working on rethinking assessment and incorporating learning as process, and the mapping the process of learning as part of that, and integrating that into the assessments. I don't think it's something that we're going to see very soon, quickly, well polished and all of that.
No.
But there's groups, at least here, I know that there's
And
a lot,
you do have staff and student guidance, because I've seen it.
Yeah, we do have a lot. Yeah, we do have a lot of that. And it varies, but we do have it. So we don't have any more time for questions, I'm afraid, but we're going to be outside. I hope our guests can join. I have one final thing to say to you before I leave you. Is that the next event, the next part of this event, is not going to be here in this room. We're going to go, if you go outside and to your left, there's a room called the Wolfson Theatre. That is where the fireside chat is going to happen with Cam Benoit and Nicholas Lumblatt, Director of Public Policy at Google DeepMind. So I'll see you there at 6. In the meantime, stick around, let's mingle, chat, and ask your questions you didn't have the time. Thank you very much for coming.